I would like to ask the Premier what specific steps, which actions are being taken by this government.
Tonight, 17 youth are at imminent risk of becoming victims, according to Manitoba's Child Advocate, who now is responsible to ensure their safety.
And it is about the good things that were here before the settlers arrived and thought that they knew better.
The focus on Mi'kmaq control over Mi'kmaq education remains, says the federal government.
Well, I think it's sort of a follow-up to our Olympic experience in 2010.
And it's official, APTN will broadcast an NHL game in Cree. Good evening, welcome to APTN National News. I'm Dennis Ward. An Indigenous organization says more investments need to be made at the grassroots level. This comes after the Manitoba government's Children's Advocate says there are hundreds of at-risk youth with similar stories to Tina Fontaine. In her report on the death of Fontaine, the government advocate wrote that her office is working with 17 youth needing treatment. Brittany Hobson has more.
Cora Morgan wasn't surprised after reading a report on the death of Tina Fontaine.
We know that children are losing their lives and that, every few months there's a report generated years after the fact, but the issues still exist. There is an adequate change in the way that these systems operate, and we need action. We need things that are going to compel change in those systems.
On Tuesday, the province of Manitoba's Children's Advocate published its much-awaited report. During the release, Children's Advocate Daphne Penrose said her office is working with several youth needing treatment and warned if changes weren't made in mental health and addiction services, those youth could end up like Tina Fontaine.
We have 17 young people who are at imminent risk of death or dying.
Penrose says the government needs to provide more services for at-risk youth. But Morgan, who is the First Nations family advocate, doesn't believe the answer lies with the province. She wants an independent inquiry into Fontaine's death.
I think that it belongs within our First Nations to be able to tell the stories of our families, and that we don't need a provincial body that is critiquing another provincial body or their extension.
Premier Brian Pallister has nixed Morgan's request, but the provincial opposition questioned the Premier on Penrose's claim.
I would like to ask the Premier what specific steps, which actions are being taken by this government to ensure that these 17 youth who are at risk of imminent harm or death are being cared for and will be kept safe.
We followed up upon learning of this assertion, and I am told the director of CFS has followed up with the advocate by email already to ascertain exactly who these children are that were referenced in yesterday's commentary and whether or not they've been reported or not.
But the actual number of at-risk youth in Winnipeg needing treatment is higher. Street Reach is a provincial program. It works to stop the exploitation of children and youth. The group is currently working with 12 youth deemed to be high risk, according to a spokesperson. Morgan's own office hosts a youth empowering program. She says grassroots organizations are doing the work, and that's where investments need to go.
And in the meantime, our grassroots people respond with whatever they can, with whatever generosity, whatever fundraising they can do to make sure that they can offer what they can to protect our community members.
Brittany Hobson, APTN National News, Winnipeg.
References in the report on Tina Fontaine's life and death to residential schools and intergenerational trauma are important and accurate, says the director of the National Centre for Truth and Reconciliation. The Manitoba Child Advocate's report says Fontaine was part of a family that carried the legacies of residential schools and other structural inequities. The report points out that Fontaine never received the counseling promised following the murder of her father. Ryan Moran says trauma-informed, culturally safe counseling can save lives. The Tina Fontaine report was the subject of a school forum at a high school in Winnipeg. Students at Sisler High School heard from community leaders about moving forward. Panelists included Senator M.J. McCallum, MP Robert Falcon-Ouellette, and an elder on the Mayor's Council. They spoke about their own experiences as Indigenous peoples and broader issues in the community. The teacher who organized the event says he hopes the day inspires future leaders.
They're just beginning their lives as leaders in their communities, and the 94 recommendations, the missing murdered Indigenous women findings, these are things that they're going to have to figure out how to move forward on.
Thank you, Robert. Shedden says the panel was the first of its kind at the school. Well, we'd like to hear what you think. Here's how to continue that conversation. Send your emails to news@aptn.ca. Find us online at aptnnews.ca and on youtube.com/aptnnews. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram for the latest Indigenous news. Mi'kmaq communities are closing the educational gap. Since 1997, they've had jurisdiction over schools. The federal government wants that to continue with $65 million a year for the next 10 years. When the Mi'kmaq Education Agreement was developed in 1997, graduation rates were 30% for high school students. Now they are 90%. Mi'kmaq chiefs and Canada's Crown Indigenous Relations Minister renewed that agreement today. Carolyn Bennett says teaching traditions and language in schools is the reason why students are doing better.
It is about reclaiming the spirit, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. This is about balance, and it is about the good things that were here before the settlers arrived and thought that they knew better.
Cat Lake First Nation and the federal government have now signed off on an agreement to try and alleviate the housing crisis in the Ontario community. The $12.8 million final agreement includes 15 new housing units and 10 new modular homes. 21 existing homes will also be renovated and repaired. Cat Lake declared a state of emergency in January over poor housing conditions and mold-infested homes. There are also major health concerns related to the housing issue. At a meeting last month in Thunder Bay, Indigenous Services initially promised $10 million. Construction supplies and the modular homes are expected to be transported to the community when the winter road is able to support the weight. 7 years ago, a British Columbia man was left with a permanent brain injury after being assaulted while in a RCMP holding cell. 3 years ago, he successfully sued the RCMP and received an undisclosed settlement. But now he's back in court, except this time it's to fight for the money they already fought for and won. APTN's Tina House has more.
This is footage taken inside an RCMP detachment in Terrace, BC, back in 2012. It shows Robert Wright, who was arrested for suspected drunk driving, being taken into his cell while handcuffed. The next part of the video shows Constable Brian Heidemann throwing Robert to the ground, striking his head on the bench and concrete floor, while still in handcuffs. A trail of blood can be seen on the floor. He was left with permanent brain damage. He sued the RCMP and won a settlement. He's not allowed to disclose how much, but says his lawyer at the time assured the amount would guarantee he would be well taken care of. However, his wife, Heather Prisk, says that's not the case.
It was recommended that Robert have a paid caregiver for 16 hours a day, and when Royal Trust took over as trustee, they only allowed 20 hours a week for paid care for Rob, so I was carrying all the rest.
His wife has become his full-time caregiver since his injury. She says that she can't get a job because her husband needs her. And that means that they both only survive with his one disbursement of $2,000 a month from the settlement.
I'd like to go get a job because I'd like to earn a living because I have a degree in social work and I'm not meant to stay home look after one person for free. Like, We're being taken advantage of, the situation, the way it's been set up, so that Robert is continually to be victimized by the Department of Justice, and it's like, I'm working for free for the cops for brain injuring my husband. I don't understand why we settled if there wasn't going to be enough money for him just to have his basic medical care covered, for him to be able to live at home.
They are currently living in New Brunswick in a small trailer and hope that the trust will finally allow them to live in peace as he continues to heal. Their lawyer heads back into court against Royal Trust tomorrow. As for the constable who injured Robert, he's being transferred to the Vernon RCMP detachment, despite 2 other complaints of First Nations people being assaulted by him while in custody. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
A new survey shows Canada's new food guide may be too expensive, or maybe just not enticing enough for most Canadians. Researchers from Dalhousie University and the University of Guelph found that just over half of consumers said they face barriers in adopting the new recommendations. More than a quarter said they can't afford it, while others blamed taste preference and dietary cultural restrictions. Well, time to step aside for a quick break, but first a look at what's coming up after tonight's newscast.
Hello, I'm Todd Lamoran, and here's what's coming up on Nation to Nation. Bill C-91 is the Indigenous Languages Act. It's supposed to preserve and revitalize language. It's currently being studied in committee, and witnesses have already suggested amendments. We speak to one of those, Algonquin Elder Claudette Commanda. As well, the Inuit aren't happy with C-91. Inuit Tapiri Kanatami President Natan Obed will be by to tell us about that. But AFN National Chief Perry Bellegarde cautions against too much meddling with this legislation, or risk having it die when the House adjourns in June. That's coming up right after the national news.
Here's a look at Friday's weather forecast, starting on the East Coast. +9 for Halifax, 7 above with showers for Charlottetown. -4 with snow in Nain, 0 with a rain-snow mix for Happy Valley Goose Bay. Rain and +5 for Montreal and Quebec City. Rain and 7 above in Chibougamau. 7 above as well for Toronto and Ottawa with showers, +2 in North Bay. -4 and snow in Thunder Bay, -6 and snow in Sioux Lookout. Sunny skies across northern Manitoba, -8 for God's Lake, -3 in Puckatawagan, -5 with snow for Winnipeg, -2 and snow in Brandon, -1 in Saskatoon, Regina and Estevan, +2 in Swift Current, -1 for Uranium City and Stony Rapids. Welcome back. There's no doubt Turtle Island, or what is now known as Canada, is a hockey nation. And now, for the first time in NHL history, hockey fans and players alike will get to hear a game called in an Indigenous language. Sportsnet and APTN have teamed up to deliver the first ever NHL game in Cree. Here's Brittany Hobson with more on this milestone.
Here's a chance out in front. Calvert shoots. Big stop by Price.
On March 24th, national hockey will go from this
has a chance for Stoll right in. He scores!
to this.
Tam skat now. We tell them again to make you out. In a give a gun it and they hear away. The nas come go every motor, to motor, a pump big square, you go. A pump snamwa, a wash, and nas come now. Wow.
For the first time in NHL history, a game will be called in Cree. Sportsnet is teaming up with APTN to bring this historic broadcast to the airwaves.
Well, I think it's sort of a follow-up to our Olympic experience in 2010. At that time, our audience had told us they really wanted us to try to find ways to have more sport, and one of them was hockey.
The game is a part of Rogers' hometown hockey in Cree, where viewers will watch the Montreal Canadiens meet the Carolina Hurricanes. A 4-member panel will deliver Cree language analysis and commentary. Former NHLer John Chabot will lend his knowledge and experience in the game.
we want to use this as an opening, I guess, as an opening to something further, and having it every week would be that opening, and then beyond that, we can start working towards that. But right now, it's going to be hockey. It's going to be something that interests a lot of communities, and it's something we want to see used going forward.
Hailing from Pelican Lake First Nation in Saskatchewan, Jason Chamakis will be providing commentary.
And hopefully what we're doing with this production will inspire other people, not just young people, but even those who are disenfranchised from their traditional language to learn it and to use it as positively as they can.
Play-by-play will be done by Clarence Iron, who is from Pine House, Saskatchewan.
You know, people were calling me, they're excited, they're asking me when is it, and they want to listen. So they're kind of hungry for play-by-play in Cree.
Earl Wood will be hosting. Wood is from Saddle Lake, Alberta, and is one of the founding members of the Northern Cree Singers. He says the game is about much more than hockey.
It is going to illuminate and enlighten, and it's going to reinvigorate interest throughout Indigenous communities and beyond, recognizing the importance of the Indigenous language and what the worldview has, the Indigenous worldview through that language has to offer.
The broadcast will complement hometown hockey's Stop and Enoch Cree Nation. Live coverage will air on APTN on Sunday, March 24th at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. Brittany Hobson, APTN National News.
Well, it is exciting news, and once again, in case you missed it, mark your calendars. That game between the Montreal Canadiens and the Carolina Hurricanes in Prairie Cree will air right here on APTN on Sunday, March 24th at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. With the playoffs on the horizon, every game is an important game. Forcing Christianity on Indigenous people in Canada was once part of the colonial toolbox. So how do modern Indigenous communities practice evangelicism without all the pressure? APTN Investigates reporter John Murray finds out. Here is a preview of tomorrow night's episode, Colonialism Continued.
Some say it's colonialism.
What are you doing, my baby? Being a big girl?
But it moves Indigenous people.
Good. Good to go. The show.
Christianity.
I believe that God opened many different doors for me that wouldn't have been there otherwise.
I think I'm going to wear my flower boots today.
If I didn't have people praying for me.
Okay, thanks. Okay, thanks, Travel. Talk to you later.
Yeah, you bet.
If I didn't have my ancestors, my forefathers praying for me. And if I didn't have, the faith that I do. So it's been a constant journey that I've been on.
It provides connection.
The praise and worship is a time that I personally use to get quiet inside. Even though I'm singing and worshiping, I'm getting quiet inside to connect to God.
Community.
The people will lay hands on you if you want them to, because we believe that a prayer, when you lay hands on someone, the energy and the spirit of that prayer goes through them, the Holy Spirit, and goes up, and so it's all connected.
And you can catch that episode of APTN Investigates tomorrow night here after the news. Before we get to our own weather report, some bad weather is affecting our neighbors to the south. A big truck was no match for a powerful windstorm in Texas.
Oh my God. Oh my God.
Wow, that semi was lifted off the ground by wind gusts of about 120 kilometers an hour. The extreme weather was part of yesterday's bomb cyclone that struck several U.S. states. Fortunately, the airborne truck mishap caused no major injuries. And that bomb cyclone is bringing high winds and intense snow through parts of the U.S. It's causing major headaches for first responders across the West.
It was horrible. There were roads closed and all kinds. I'm surprised we got here.
A state of emergency was declared in Colorado due to the cyclone, as more than 1,000 drivers were forced to wait for hours in the bitter cold during a 100-car pileup on a state highway. Blizzard and high wind warnings are in place as a storm risk stretches from the Great Lakes to the south. A pair of prominent Indigenous leaders were honored in Ottawa today. More on that coming up after the break. Here's a look at the rest of Friday's weather forecast, picking back up in northern Alberta. +4 under sunny skies for Grand Prairie, +2 in Peace River, 4 above with the sun out for Calgary and Lethbridge, +3 in Medicine Hat, 11 with showers in Victoria, +12 for Vancouver, +7 under sunny skies for Fort Nelson, 5 above and sunny for Prince George, -6 in Old Crow, -3 in Rock River, +3 in Whitehorse, +7 in Fort Liard and Trout Lake, 6 above for Fort Simpson, -19 in Sax Harbor, snow and 11 below for Pawlatuck, -6 in Colville Lake, -27 for Repulse Bay and Cambridge Bay, 21 below for Whale Cove, -29 in Arctic Bay, -20 in Pangertung. Welcome back. The prestigious Order of Canada ceremony took place in Ottawa today. And 2 prominent Indigenous leaders were invested. APTN's Amber Bernard has more.
Former Assembly of First Nations National Chief and longtime Indigenous rights advocate Matthew Kuncombe was invested as Officer of the Order of Canada. While he remains publicly critical of the federal government, he says this award won't change that.
I will always defend the rights of Indigenous peoples. I will always speak out when I see there's injustices towards our people. And certainly this government, I think, has to be made accountable, to be shown to be transparent, and to address the deplorable conditions that our First Nations communities live on. So I can use this as a launching pad.
And appointed as member of the Order of Canada is Marie-Anne Day Walker-Pelletier. She's the longest-serving chief in Canada, going into her 38th year as leader of her community, Okanese. She says being an Indigenous woman and leader comes with its challenges.
No, nothing is easy when you work hard. Nothing is easy when sometimes you're the only female around the boardroom tables, around the tables. But I guess what really provides my leadership is relying on my cultural and spiritual and my elders and knowledge keepers.
The Order of Canada appointed 40 new recipients today. Nearly 7,000 people have been invested so far. Amber Bernard, APTN National News, Ottawa.
And congrats to those who were honored today. That's your APTN National News for this Thursday. For much more, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. Stay tuned. Nation to Nation with Todd Lamarand is next. I'm Dennis Ward. Have a great night. We'll see you back here tomorrow.